I'm a former Georgia State representative for Athens, Georgia, and I am currently running for district attorney in the Western Judicial Circuit. I'm very pleased to be here moderating this panel on leadership. This panel came about because of an inquiry out to ACS members about what topics they would like, and then what about leadership. Once leadership was identified, what about leadership you really wanted to learn? And we could have had a conference just on those topics. So it's really hard to get everything that everybody wanted into about an hour and 45 minutes. So instead, we took what we thought sort of summarized most of what was on that list. But there will be some additional resources available to you online, and we do encourage that, after this session, if this is something that you want to pursue a little bit more, please continue. There are lots of good leadership programs. We'll share some resources with you, but it is really important that you don't think that after this, we all know it like that marijuana law, right? Law school. So I'm just going to have, what we're going to do is we're going to begin by getting to know who our, there we go. Getting to know who our panelists are. They're each going to have 10 minutes to sort of introduce themselves and to talk about one of the relevant tenets of leadership from that list. After that, what we're going to do is we are going to have an exercise. Yeah, you're just not going to sit there and listen because we are the session before lunch. Okay, so we've got to get you moving. We're going to do an exercise to sort of put into practice some of what you've heard from the panelists. Then we're going to come back, report back. I will not start choosing people unless nobody starts participating. Okay, and I do know some of your names, so you'll be the first ones that I pick. We're going to report back, and then we're going to end with some time for Q&A, so you can explore some additional issues, and then some last words of wisdom from the panelists. So, everybody okay with that? Awesome. Well, let me introduce our first panelist of the day, and this is Bob Sleppy. He's an adjunct faculty at the University of Georgia Institute for Nonprofit Organizations, but I got to meet Bob because he is the executive director of Nucci Space, and there was a question about mental illness. Nuci Space is a nonprofit in Athens, Georgia, that was created because a young man named Nuci committed suicide. He was a musician. Those of you might know of Athens because of REM and the B-52s, and there is an issue about depression and musicians. And so Nuci Space was created to offer those services to our community. So welcome, Bob.
Thank you so much, Deborah. Hope everybody's doing well today. I guess I'll give you a little bit of background on myself. Deborah kind of gave you the basics, but Nucci Space, as Deborah said, was created in memory of Nucci Phillips. He was a musician. He was also a senior at the University of Georgia. He was diagnosed with clinical depression when he was a junior in high school. He suffered with that disease for 5 years until his senior year when he took his own life. His mom, Linda Phillips, came up with the idea for Nucci Space mainly for two reasons. One, to focus on Nucci's passion, which is music, and the other one is to get access to mental health care in a timely manner and remove as many obstacles as possible. Part of Nucci's story was that he knew his disease well, so when he started not feeling well, he reached out for help, and he went to University Services beginning of November of 1996, and he received an appointment for mid-December. I think it's really important to point out that if you walked into an emergency room with chest pains and they said, well, why don't you come in back in about 6 weeks, that probably wouldn't fly for most of us. Unfortunately, mental illness is treated that way sometimes. We're making some forward progress, but I definitely want to take this opportunity to point that out and make sure that's a big part of what we do, is making sure people get access to time, access to healthcare in a timely manner. I totally lucked out into my job, to be honest with you. I benefited mainly because Linda doesn't know how to hire people. That's really what it came down to. I had zero background in nonprofit organizations. I was a college dropout. I was prepping chicken in a restaurant in Athens. I just happened to connect with Linda. I had a close friend of mine that took his own life my sophomore year in college. And we just hit it off, and I basically learned on the job. And I eventually went back to school, got my undergrad at UGA, and also got my graduate degree, my MBA at UGA. I had leadership jobs in the past, as far as like working in restaurants. And I also was a touring musician for several years, so I had to kind of do the business end of things for that. But my becoming a better leader was completely on the job, in trial and error. And if any of my former employees are in this room, I apologize, because I didn't know what I was doing for a very long time. So, but the good thing is, there are skills that you can actually develop. My kind of leadership journey started very young. I was joined basically the Boy Scouts when I was 11, and gave great opportunities to lead other people and learn through activities like hiking and camping and all those sort of things. And once I received my Eagle Scout, I never really thought about much of that stuff after that. Just went about my life, and it wasn't until I had my daughter, who's now 11, and we started hiking when she was probably about 6 or 7. And all those kind of things that I learned when I was a Boy Scout started popping up. And I had already started teaching by that time. The classes I teach at UGA are nonprofit leadership, theory management of nonprofits, and social entrepreneurship. And so, as I'm hiking with my daughter, and I'm teaching her all these bits of wisdom, which I'm half remembering, we started talking about the North Star. And I started connecting the dots with what I was teaching in class, with being out there on a trail and talking to my daughter. And the unique thing about the North Star is, and I'm sure most of you know this, is that it's aligned perfectly with the Earth axis. So if you're looking up at the sky, when everything else is moving, it seems to appear to stay in one place. And I started thinking about, the way I teach leadership is, it's incredibly important that you know yourself first before you can lead other people. You need to know where you are before you can go somewhere else. And the thing that I liked about think of those two things together was that when you assess your kind of core values, who you are, that becomes your North Star. That becomes your North Star. And you can then develop those skills. You can also align yourself with other people that have those same sort of values. You can also work with organizations that your values align with. So it's kind of the cornerstone of everything when it comes to leadership. Peter Drucker wrote a really a great article that was published in Harvard Business Review in 1999. It's called Managing Oneself. I think it's pretty easy to find. But there's several questions that he proposed that said, these are some things you should think about when learning about yourself as a leader. And one of those was know your values. And that's not going to be the exercise that we do today, but I did include a copy of that for you to get an email afterwards, so you can look at that when you get a chance. Another one is getting to know your strengths. I think especially as a young leader, I always felt like I had to be the smartest person in the room. I had to know every single thing to be able to lead everybody. And first of all, it's not very efficient, and it's almost impossible. So getting to know your strengths and and also what your weaknesses are. It's almost just as important to know what your weaknesses are. And then you have to determine what are the things that I need to enhance or improve to become better at that skill, but also be realistic about the things that, you know, maybe you shouldn't invest as much time into because you're kind of wasting your resources. Like, you know, I'm a drummer, you know, and, you know, I practice to become a better drummer. Never once did I think, okay, well, I need to learn how to play guitar and bass and sing. And thank goodness for all of us that I never learned how to sing, so I'm not going to share that with you today. So, but, you know, if I would have taken that time to put into those other instruments, that's time and resources I wouldn't put into my primary instrument. So it's important to also know where to put your resources and your time. Another question that Drucker points out is learning how you work and also how you learn. You know, some people learn better by reading. Other people learn better by listening. I'm a very tactile person. I've learned best when I'm actually having to do it. And also finding out who those people that are feeding that information to you, you know, if you are listening to folks and you just you don't learn that way, it's probably not a good match. And then the other two are where do I belong? It's really important to make sure that you align yourself with organizations that share those same values and will work well with your strengths and your skills that you have. And then what can I contribute? And so if you're able to look and see and know what your role is in the world and in your organization, you can better serve the people that are working with you and also better serve the organization. So that's kind of our very quick and dirty version of kind of leading yourself. So I'm going to pass over to Tony now to talk about kind of building teams.
Thank you. If I look behind me, I'm just trying to make sure I'm on the right slide. So, right, could you, well, yeah, leave this up for now, and then I'll just, so I'll just briefly introduce myself. My name is Tony Mallon. I'm the director of the Institute for Nonprofit Organizations at UGA. We're housed in the School of Social Work. I'll be talking about leadership, you know, basically from my perspective, my experiences. So I'm not suggesting, you know, I think there's a lot of expertise in this room. So what I'd like to ask you is relate some of my anecdotes to positions that you've been in. The way I about my leadership experience, I think about I've been in positions where I'm leading from the front. So I might, you know, be the nominal leader. And an example of that is executive director of a nonprofit. But then sometimes you're leading from the middle where you're not necessarily the nominal leader. And again, as an executive of a nonprofit, you might be leading your staff, but you're reporting to the board. And so the context where you are depends on, you know, kind of how you function as a leader. And then sometimes you're leading from behind. The example there is I'm a faculty member at UGA, and I'm a leader of a committee there. All of the other faculty members are senior to me. So, and I'm a non-tenured faculty member. So I need to figure out how do I lead people, get them to do what we need to do, yet I have absolutely no authority over them whatsoever. In fact, arguably, they're at least higher, you know, on the hierarchy. So I'll give you some examples of where that's happened. And again, I'm sure you can kind of connect that to your role as attorneys or judges or other positions that you're in. And so just real quickly too, my background, I used to be a high school teacher, did that for a few years, and then I became a clinical social worker, really enjoyed working one-on-one with my students who were challenged, and I worked in New York City at an agency called Women in Need and as a clinical social worker, and I'll reference this in a minute, and then I became interested more in policy work because the welfare law was changing in the mid-90s, and it really impacted our agency and our clients. And so my PhD is in political science, and so I love being in rooms where it's interdisciplinary and with other professionals, because I cover a lot of different ground myself. But what I'd like to talk about, kind of my three. Actually, if you could go back to the one that says deliberative. Yeah. So when it comes to knowing yourself, I'm in my 50s now, and I think it was like last year that I finally figured out who I am as a leader. And I took a leadership training, and it turns out, and it's similar to what we're going to ask you to go through in a little bit. This is a different one. This is the Clifton Strengths one. And I go into these trainings typically very cynical and skeptical. I think I know myself. I don't need someone to tell me, who I am. But after I did the survey, I came out as deliberative. And if you can see, it says people who are deliberative are best described by the serious care they take in making decisions or choices. They anticipate obstacles. And I said, oh, now this explains things, because the way I have been operating in most of the context is I often sit back, wait, listen for everything, and then I basically pick holes in it and say, here's what's wrong with it, here's what we need to improve. It always made me feel like kind of a downer. A typical example would be where I'd be in a community meeting with lots of other nonprofits, or someone would come to me as the institute director and say, I want to start a nonprofit. They're passionate, they have a lot of energy. I let them explain it to me, and then I start firing questions at them that points out all the things they didn't think about. And again, I always felt bad doing that, but I said, but I just can't help but kind of scrutinize some of these ideas. When I then went through this training, I said, okay, I'm not a jerk. I'm just a deliberative leader. And so it really is helpful, whether it's this or the, some way to kind of get to know your style. It helps you kind of understand why you act the way you do, which again, for me was quite freeing, but also, as we'll talk about later, how you can complement other people and how you also can understand, why are they operating in this way versus the way that I think it should be done. But I do want to just go through kind of a few the takeaways. You can go to, that slide. So following goals, not individuals. In the nonprofit world, for sure, mission is really everything. And so you could be at a nonprofit or working with other nonprofits, and really the idea is, what is the mission, what is driving, why we're doing what we're doing. And so in any kind of a leadership role, whether it's at a nonprofit or with a committee, or if you're with a group of other professionals, really trying to establish, why are we here? What are we trying to accomplish? I think is a key goal of leadership, regardless of whether you're leading from the front, the middle, or from behind. In a nonprofit world, there are actually mechanisms to do this. So again, people say, I've got this great idea, I want to help youth, or I want to help animal rights, whatever the goal is. But the mission alone, that's the overarching goal. Then we have to say, well, what are the tasks that we have to carry out? There's something we use in the nonprofit world called a logic model. Has anyone heard of a logic model? Nobody? Oh, one. Okay. Nobody in the audience, though. Well, I can send you copies of it. It's just a mechanism, really, to say, okay, let's take these kind of amorphous ideas. What are the ultimate goals? And then you back into, what are the resources that we're going to need? What are the outcomes that we're looking for? Because a lot of nonprofits, they say, we help people, we serve X number of people. But serving people is not an outcome, it's an output. And just, for example, food banks will typically say, we delivered 1,000 pounds of food this week. That's an output, that's not an outcome. Did you actually reduce hunger? And so really trying to think about goals and outcomes and then gathering people towards that mission is something that I have found successful. The next one, engaging colleagues as true partners. Again, I think this is the part of leadership that can be frustrating, but ultimately in the long run is much more helpful. And I'll use an example from social work. We have a concept called mutuality. And when we're working with someone in a clinical context, we establish mutual goals. We say, what is it that you're trying to achieve? Are you trying to reduce your substance abuse? Are you trying to have a better relationship with your children? And the social worker does not say, okay, so here's what you need to do. We establish with that person a mutual plan where we each have a role and responsibility. And actually, this goes back, I forgot to mention, I used to sell health club memberships as well. This actually goes back to that. I could sell someone a membership. I could Get them to sign on the dotted line, give me $1,000 for a membership that this was up north at Bally's. It was really expensive back when I did this. But then they come for a few days and then they never come back. Or I could say, well, listen, let's really establish your goals. What are you trying to achieve? I was notorious for people not buying the membership on that first day, and my manager hated me for it. He wanted the hard sell. He did not want me to let someone out of that office without buying a membership. But I also had a reputation for having the highest number of people who came back and the fewest number of people that once they did sign, they didn't cancel their membership, because we worked establishing mutual goals. And social work's the same way. I think leadership is the same way. You can, by force of personality or your authority, your title, get people to quote unquote sign on the dotted line, but it's not going to maintain, your leadership is going to be short-lived and you're not going to actually reach your goal. So I think that's a concept that again has been successful for me or people that I've worked with. And so engaging your colleagues as true partners. An example of this, I met a woman recently. Her name is Pamela Landworth. She's the CEO of Give Kids the World. It's a theme park in Florida right next to Disney, and it's for children who have terminal illnesses. And so she said the way her leadership style is to really engage everyone in that works for her. Okay. And one of the examples she said is they were building a new wing of the hotel, and they talked to the maintenance people and they said, what are your ideas for this? And they said in capital letters, no carpet. We don't want carpet. It makes it harder to clean the room. It keeps stains and things like that. They built it, no carpet. They're now much more efficient. So this is so the idea there is that, again, no matter who's on your team, engaging everyone in the process of establishing what those goals are and how to achieve those goals. The last thing, again, I'm going back to my deliberation, using deliberation as a leadership tool. I kind of alluded to this already, that you can be a good leader by critiquing people as long as you do it. You're not critiquing the person, you're critiquing the idea. You're helping them establish what the goal is that they want to achieve. And so again, kind of for me, using deliberation is a leadership tool. For other people who maybe, and you'll see later, you might be more relational or you might be more of an achiever. There's different types of leaders. Kind of acknowledging that and thinking about using that as a tool in your leadership. I'll get back to, I've got like 1 minute. I just wanted to go, well, I'll stop. I'll do it in the Q&A. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Jerry Gonzalez. I'm Executive Director of GALEO, the Georgia Association of Latino Elected Officials. And I want to start out by giving a little background as well. I was born in Laredo, Texas, right on the border of U.S.-Mexico, directly south of San Antonio, Texas. I have a BS in Mechanical Engineering and a Master's in Public Administration in both policy analysts and nonprofit administration focus. So that's why I know what a logic model is. And I just wanted to talk about that. I think because it illustrates sort of a journey of leadership that isn't necessarily a directly linear path that people can take, and it's really an ongoing process. I wanted to talk a little bit about what we do as an organization to sort of center my part of the conversation here. GALEO is a nonpartisan organization that focuses on promoting civic engagement and leadership development of the Latino community all across the great state of Georgia. Under civic engagement, we do a lot of work around voter registration, get out the vote, voter education. We're well known for advocacy particularly on immigrant rights and voting rights. And living in Georgia, we know it's a difficult state to do that in. And we also help people become citizens. So those that are eligible to legal permanent residents that are ready to become citizens, we help eliminate some of the barriers that they may have associated with them becoming U.S. citizens. And then lastly, under civic engagement, we're promoting participation in the census. How many of you can I count on to be census ambassadors in this room? Everybody? We really, it's an all hands on deck type of moment for our democracy. Current administration has taken it's really a significant effort to try to suppress minority participation in the census, and we've seen by the Supreme Court rulings and everything that came out with the Supreme Court decision that really we need everybody to participate in the census. So if I could count on you all to be census ambassadors, that would be great. If you need more information about that, I'd be more than happy to facilitate that. Under leadership development, we do a significant amount of work as well. In fact, I think we don't get a lot of recognition for our work in leadership development, but really I think it's really central to what we have done. We have the GALEO Institute for Leadership, which is a year-long program that brings community leaders together, 18 and older, to essentially develop a basic skills, leadership skills development. And the first part of the process, you heard some of this in various iterations already, the first part of that process is learning more about yourself. Learning more about yourself and how your style interacts with other leadership styles and communication styles. It's really essential to be introspective in wanting to be in a position of leadership and making sure that one can do that. We've also, under leadership, we've also been significant in ensuring that we have appointments of Latino or Latinx community leaders at serving our government in a variety of roles, whether state government or our federal government. We've played an integral role in that. My leadership journey really has been, I think, non-linear. I never really saw myself as a leader until I started becoming more interested in policy and politics. And then really participated in various leadership programs, which I would strongly recommend any type of leadership program that you have the ability to be able to be a part of, to engage in that. I've been part of Leadership Atlanta, Leadership Georgia. The most recent transformational leadership program for myself personally is Rockwood Leadership Institute, year-long fellowship with Rockwood. And what that was essentially a cohort of executive directors of progressive organizations from around the country. And we dug into a leadership journey together, and much of that was about who we are, what our values are, and what we can bring to the table, not just for our own communities, but really for the world. So looking bigger, being bigger, bolder, progressive leaders that we needed to be. So the three, I wanted to sort of lay that out as context. And the three big aha moments I think I have with regards to leadership is, number one, particularly in the immigrant community, if you work with the immigrant community or interact with the immigrant community or are part of the immigrant community, one of the biggest one of the biggest things that we've seen in the process of our leadership program has been that there's a significant paradigm shift of the concept in and of itself of leadership and what that means. Immigrant communities bring a concept of leadership from where they come from. And usually leadership in other places means a position of power, a position of social status, a position of wealth. But in reality, here in this country, that notion of leadership is really more inclusive than that. And that leads me to my next takeaway, is really, it is an inclusive style of leadership. Every single human being has the capacity and the ability to be able to be a leader. Part of the challenge that we all have is how do we create the space to bring that out in people? Because leadership is not just working on with oneself, it's about working in a team and ensuring that we can draw leadership capabilities out of everyone else that we interact with. So that's the inclusive part of leadership, inclusive concept of leadership. Doesn't matter social status, doesn't matter immigrant status, doesn't matter citizenship status, doesn't matter where you're from, how much money you have, or what education you may have or not have. Every single human being has dignity and capacity for leadership, and that's really what has grounded our leadership program, where we've done tremendous work with that. And then part of the third takeaway that I have is trust is essential and vital, not just in building relationships as a leader, but building relationships across different organizations. I'm part of an organization called Pro Georgia. Pro Georgia is a collaboration of organizations that it's a progressive organization that works together with other progressive organizations that have at their core voter engagement. And voter engagement in our community, before Pro Georgia was created about 5 years ago, each of our organizations were doing our work in our own silos and wanting to make, the Latinos were working in our own silo, Asian Americans were working in their own silos, African American community and different organizations were working in their own silos. The environmental groups were working alone, the women's groups were working alone. Now we have a collaboration of well over 40 organizations that really look at the landscape when it comes to voter engagement and really thinks bigger about the work that we do in collaboration. We all have the shared values of ensuring that we can protect our democracy, and how do we best work together to, we have limited resources and time associated with what we need to do, but how do we leverage each other's strengths and abilities to be able to do more in the space that we're working in? So part of that has been in us building trust with one another, and with 40 organizations it's difficult, and particularly every organization has its niche in what they're particularly focused on, but really looking at the big picture and wanting to make sure that the rising American electorate, those that are minorities, new Americans, women, young people, are voting in elections is vital to the work that we do, and we help support each other in that work. So developing trust is essential to that. That requires a lot of time and a lot of investment, both in resources and time. So if there is the notion of developing trust, not just having a quick drink with somebody at cocktail hour is going to develop trust. It really does take time and investment to ensure that you can develop a relationship to where there is significant trust, to where you can do some things together. And that, I think, is a key ingredient of really good, inclusive leadership. So I think my time is up with that.
Okay, so that gives you like Leadership 101 in 30 seconds or less, right? And you probably have more questions than what were just put out. So some people really learn something if you actually do immediately after you hear something, actually do it. And that's what we're going to do right now. We had a handout, and I just want to check, did everybody get the handout? Okay, we have some people up front who haven't received it. We will get it to you in a minute. It is a 2-page handout, and we are going to look at a leadership model that focuses on strength. So we're going to do a little bit about that know thyself, right? You heard that in the judges panel in the beginning. Know yourself, be authentic to yourself. You've heard that repeated a number of times by the panelists here. And I'm going to have Tony introduce what this model is from while we make sure that those who do not have the handout do get them.
Thank you. And actually, if it's okay, I just want to highlight something that Jerry just said. In Athens, university is a major player, and we want to work with the community, but there are reasons why the community is not always trusting of the faculty. We may just want to work with the community to publish papers or to get a grant, and so the idea of trust is really, really important. And I was at an event with the gentleman who runs, it's called the Athens Immigrant Rights Coalition, and someone said, how can we work effectively with your organization and with the Latinx community? And he said, be here. And so it was just simple. He's like, don't just show up on a one-time thing. You have to be here all the time. And so I think, again, your leadership style, setting goals, I do think that's all important, but if the trust isn't there and if the relationship isn't there, then I do think that the rest of it really will be challenging to implement. So having said that, I do want to have us move back to the handout. And this again, this is there's a lot of different frameworks. There's something called True Colors. Some of you may have done that. There's the one that I just showed you. I'm blanking on the name right now, but this is the People Style Framework by Bolton. So we're not suggesting this is necessarily the best one, but it does kind of, it's a fairly simple framework and one that we knew we could do. And I think it does start to get to the idea of not just knowing yourself in the kind of navel-gazing way, but kind of knowing yourself and then saying, okay, well, how does this actually connect to me in terms of how I lead, whether it's one person, a team, or working with a community? So there's two basic dimensions here. There's, in the People Style Framework, there's assertiveness, and then there's responsiveness. And then that breaks down into four dimensions, so in kind of communication styles. So the driver, that's the person who's like, let's get going, let's make a decision, we need to be out of here in 10 minutes. Then there's the expressive person, and again, nobody is, I don't want to create caricatures. We all have elements of all of this, but you'll probably find yourself, some of these are stronger in you than others. The expressive person is more, let me share my latest ideas. Now, a driver may want to get right to the point, and then the expressive person says, well, wait a minute, I want to talk more and share my ideas. So you can imagine how if the driver doesn't understand kind of where the expressive person's coming from, there could be a potential conflict there. Whereas if they do, they can say, okay, I know Tony, he's a driver, he doesn't want to chat, but I just need to kind of remind him that it's important for me to do that, or me as the driver needs to understand that. And then there's the analytical person who also wants to take more time, but it's more analysis. They may want to go off by themselves, get more information, get more data. And then the amiable person, which is considering how is this decision going to affect others. And I think that there's no one best way, as Bob was saying before. If you're in a band, you don't want 4 drummers, and I guess unless it's a drum line. But even drum lines have, the snare drum, the bass drum, things like that. So that's the basic framework. The part that you actually have to do now, if you go to the next page, is look through. So each of the different communication styles has various attributes. So I'd like you to each look through that, circle the attributes that you feel kind of capture your communication and leadership style. And then when you're done, rank them up at the top. So if you feel like, yeah, I'm a real driver, that would be number 1. If then analytical is maybe the second predominant characteristic, that would be a 2, and then so on. So that's what you should do first. And what I'm going to do before you get to that, let me just go through, because then I'm going to set us all free. After you do that, number 2, now that you've identified that style, we're going to ask you to kind of pair up in small groups, maybe 3 or 4, whatever seems to work where you're sitting. And then review how this style overall for you has proven to be a strength with respect to your leadership endeavors. And then highlight any specific traits within that style that you think are particularly relevant. So you've kind of heard us share. We're now wanting you to share from your experiences, but connect it directly to the attributes and the leadership style. After you're done, we're then going to ask you to do the same thing, but then choose one of the following, either thinking about this from as an individual, as a team and organization, and as a community. And once we get to that point, I'll kind of ask you to read through that section. So does anyone have any questions on what we're asking you to do? Okay, so we're just going up till to number 2 now. Okay, go for it. And we'll let you know how much time you have. So.
Okay, let's just come back for a minute right now. It's always good when you do one of these workshops if people are talking a lot, right? If people are talking a lot, that's really good, because you never know. Okay, so we're just going to take a poll right now, And you can raise your hand if you wish. If you don't, the poll doesn't work, but I'm not going to force you to raise your hand, okay? How many drivers do we have in the room? If you identified with driver, all right, okay. How many expressives in the room? Okay, we have a few, very cool. That's as great as being a driver, awesome. Okay, analytics. All right, you people like data and numbers, don't you? Welcome, we need you guys, we really do, because I'm not doing it, okay? And how many do we have who are amenable? All right. Wow, that's pretty amazing. How many of you were like tied between two? Between three, okay. Okay, well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Anybody want to report back when you were talking to your partner there for a minute? Anything come out of that brief conversation? Or were you like, this was me, I knew it all along? No? There was some insight? Yeah.
I'll start. I learned something because I did tie, and I tied between driver and amiable. And I found that very strange. And I think part of it is that I think I am instinctively a driver, and because of that, like people hate that, like you're in their face, come on, let's do this. So as a compensation strategy, I think I've tried to learn how to be amiable so that I'm not too much for people. And so that when I want to, like I know what I want to do or I know where I want to go, make sure I'm checking in with the group, make sure that like I'm not, leading everything and everybody else is not really following because they feel their input doesn't matter.
That's exactly right. That's perfect because, no one's going to be in just one of these groups all the time. It's not siloed like that, which I think we've all said, is that you learn to adapt your style based on your team or your organization and what's going to have that maximum impact in that most efficient way. And I think the more you learn about yourself and also your team, you're able to kind of manage that. Just in my own leadership journey, it's like, when I was very young, I thought, authoritative, idea was that's leadership, And then as I've gotten older and more experienced, it's like, yeah, it's actually if I maybe shut my mouth and just listen a lot more, I might be better at this. So, yeah.
Great.
I mean, we were noticing the kind of the same thing. The reason I say 3 is because I ask myself with who I'm dealing with. Like, if I'm dealing in a particular situation, I might be amiable because it's a situation where I know, you need to be diplomatic, you need to, be team oriented, and then, but I will switch depending if I'm managing my upwards, like if I'm managing my boss, I might switch to a different method of doing that. So I think I just learned that over time, having a huge number of bosses and a huge number of relationships that it's better to kind of mirror the person that you're with and try to work with their style and then really come up with my own.
Yeah, just to highlight that. So one, you can be very kind of intentional about this. I know for me, so I mentioned I'm a chair of a committee, so I'm kind of the nominal leader, but in fact, I'm not because everyone is higher ranked than me. But I'm kind of like, here's the agenda. Meeting starts at 1. Get there at 12:55, and we start right at 1. But inevitably, folks there who are amiable and they want to chat. And I have now put on my agenda 5 minutes. Like kind of introductions, how was your weekend? So it's a reminder to me that I've got to include that. It's like if you're a runner, you put your shoes next to your bed in the morning to make sure that you actually, it's on my agenda because my instinctive nature is not to do that. So yeah, whether it's to your supervisors, to your colleagues, or to whomever, you can really be very, kind of methodical about ensuring you kind of take some of these things into account, so.
And I just want to add to that sometimes it's not a direct interaction. Sometimes, like I know in my mind, when I'm writing an email to somebody, and I want to be short and sweet, hey, this is wrong, or I need this, please give it to me. And then I stop and I read it and I'm like, wow, that sounds so like in your face. Wait a minute. And then go back and I say, hi, how you doing? Did you have a nice Saturday? You know, those kinds of things. But I have to stop myself. And I had to really, because I was getting like these messages back and I'm like, why are they upset? Like I couldn't understand why they were upset with me. But it was just not that I had said anything wrong. It's just on email especially, you can't get tone. Right? You don't know, you know, they don't see the smiling, right? I'm smiling as I'm writing that email. They don't see that. And I think that's very important for us to understand not just how we communicate forward, but how that person's receiving what we say. And that's part of the leadership as well, because when people think of us as leaders, they think of all aspects. When they meet us face to face, when they're having those emails, when they're having on the phone conversations, you know, things like that. So just keeping that in mind. Okay, so now we're going to go to the second part of the exercise.
Yeah, so there's 3 scenarios below. You can do all 3 if you want, but the idea here is that we understand that some of you may be in leadership roles where it's more working one-on-one with someone. You're supervising someone or someone's supervising you, or it may be where you want to think of this in terms of your team or your organization, or it might be where you're working with the community. And so kind of think about which one is maybe most relevant to you and at least start with that one. So again, we'll kind of go back into your small groups and discuss it. But for example, if you were going to do the individual, consider someone you supervise and with whom you would like to improve your leadership effectiveness. Which people style most characterizes this person, and how does that match with your own? And then how can understanding your respective styles help you to be more effective? So you probably might have already done this a little bit as you were talking, but we'd like you to kind of really apply this to a specific situation. Again, if you don't want to report back, that's fine. It's more just in your groups. Or if you really want to think about a situation within your team or organization or within your community. So again, we'll ask you to go ahead and do that. If you finish, one and you want to get to the next one, that's fine, as long as everyone in the group has a chance to talk about at least one of these. So.
All right. Lots of great conversation, I'm sure. We could bring everybody back together and some reflections that you'd like to share with everybody about your conversations, some reporting back. Who's going to start? There's a lot of good conversation, so I'm sure there's a lot of good stuff there. Yes?
Start over here. Adam and I were talking about the law firm setting that we find a lot of people in the private category, and it's kind of, there's not so much room, it seems, to not have people who are also empathetic and expressive and amiable without in those environments you feel like, at least to get the work done. But then we switched our conversation. That may be true or not, and you can speak to that. Law firms are very, but then we switched our conversation a bit to, but how can we use this in our chapter leader roles, and talking about the various strengths that each of these categories bring, these attributes bring, and how we could think about using them to our advantage and to make sure we're bringing in people in sort of these different categories and nurturing those who come so that we can use the best of these attributes to build our chapters and lead in our communities, and it's kind of necessary. So that was it.
Thank you. Someone else?
Oh, so there's mics there, okay.
We were talking about 2 different places where we've seen these styles. One at a new job that I've got, and the other in your chapter. Okay, so just one, really. For the first time, we didn't talk about anything else. The first time in my legal career, I work with support staff now. I'm at a defender office in Michigan, and we have mitigation specialists, we have legals, we have investigators, database managers, and all of our staff are equally, if not more, committed to the mission of the defender office of the lawyers, but we play different roles. And I've come to know and learn the support staff's different styles. Most tend to be analytic, which is hard for me. It's not where it's actually my number 4 category. So it's not with, where I would see a lot of my strengths. But in developing relationships with support staff, I find that if I'm aware of deadlines and how they organize and get their task load done throughout the day, the relationship we have is fantastic. And it starts to open up opportunities for some of the ways that I like to develop relationships, where we can start to talk about stuff outside of work, and I can see the enthusiasm that everybody in this office has for our clients and for performing the system in Michigan. So it's been difficult to be punctual and detail-oriented in some of the ways, but the payoff's immense. So I've never also thought of it this way, so this is very helpful.
While I was completing this form, I considered myself amiable, but because of circumstances, I became the driver. So we have an Asian Indian women's group, and it was founded in 1980. The first generation aged out, and then it became non-existing, no activities. So I came in because I wanted the organization to continue to meet the needs of the new immigrants. So we formed a meetup group. We got about 100 members who are 30-something age group. But what I'm struggling now is with the board of directors. So we did have that in our constitution, but nobody ever set a board of directors. So when we had to decide whether to close the organization, there was no procedure. So I finally got a board of directors, but they are inactive, so I don't know what to do now. That's just a question.
I was actually going to, I like these types of frameworks because it can help you understand where people are coming from. But if someone's, for example, just isn't showing up to work, and they say, well, I'm amiable, and I had a conversation with my neighbor, well, that's nice, but you can't be late to work just because you're amiable. So this doesn't preclude sometimes having to just, and that's, again, the leadership from in front saying, well, that's nice, but, we start work at 8:30, and, if you need to come in at 9 and we need to do some flex time, then, again, you're understanding where they're coming from, but it's not kind of just a justification for any kind of behavior that is not productive to the team. In terms of, so is the question you don't have the board exists but they're not active, and so then but you need to disperse the
No, we want to revive it. It is revived. So the new immigrants are all enthusiastic about it.
Oh, okay.
The board of directors are successful leaders from the past, and they are not doing it.
Yeah, so, Bob, you probably know about this too, but one thing that I would do, and this kind of goes back to mission, I'm someone who really thinks an agency mission is actually really important. It's not just, kind of you develop it and you put it on the shelf, and the same with bylaws. So most organizations have bylaws that stipulate, for example, if a board member doesn't come to X number of meetings, they are removed, and then the remaining board brings someone back on. And so, again, we can talk separately, or I can give you my card, because it's kind of specific, but I would look at kind of, it's like what I tell my students, look at the syllabus. They ask me questions, look at the syllabus, it's all there. So look at the bylaws and other documents, because that's really how things are supposed to run. And then the question is, well, do we need to change that with, changing circumstances, new clientele, things like that? So that's just a kind of a brief answer. I don't know.
I think you said everything that I would say, yeah.
But I don't want to look at the syllabus, right? Because that's the answer that we get lots of times. We'll point somebody to where they can actually get an answer, and they're like, you know the answer, just tell me. I don't want to go and have to look it up for myself. So what do you do then?
Well, I think it's like, IKEA instructions. Sure, you don't have to look at the instructions, but you're going to wind up with a lot of extra screws and, things on the wrong side of the bookshelf. And, so you're not being as efficient if you don't want to if you don't want to look at the bylaws, expect a crooked cabinet, you know? So I think that's the thing you have to accept.
I don't think IKEA furniture putting together is a fair comparison. There was somebody who had a hand up back there. Would you like to come and talk a little bit about what you guys discussed? There's a mic right up front.
So what we discussed was I practice mostly family law and adoption law in Ohio. And so what we were discussing is that, interestingly, you feel like there's like a team and a collaboration between your client, opposing counsel, and their client, and that's maybe the strategy team approach. Whereas I hadn't really thought about my support staff in a team manner. It's just more of like a let's get this done quickly, you know, kind of approach. And so to take a step back and not just think of my clients and this team as a team, but also internally as a team, I think was really helpful and gave me a lot of perspective as to where everybody else is coming from. Though we all get along, to think about their strengths and my strengths and how to work together, I think is invaluable to move forward all together collaboratively. So.
We have time for one more. Yes.
I'll volunteer. I'm Saraswati Singh, and I spoke with Regina, who just started her new law job. And we talked about how my leadership style is expressive. And we talked about how I'm chapter leader in Minnesota, and I use expressive primarily to engage my board. But in my day job as a prosecutor, most of my colleagues are not expressive. And they're definitely drivers like the folks that were talking about law firms. And so I don't feel like I fit in, but my approach works. And so we talked about how you can have your own style and it may not necessarily fit in, but you do also have to kind of switch on and off, because in my office I'm seen as like the nice person who's outgoing, but opposing counsel sometimes takes it as she's nice, so she'll just roll over, right? And we talked about being nice doesn't mean you're stupid, right? You're still willing to do your job, but there's still certain things that you need to do that might require you dipping into another category, which is part of you, but not the part of you that you go to normally.
If I could add to that, I think you bring up a really good point in the fact that, I mean, just because our tendencies are in one category doesn't mean we don't have the other methods of leadership at our disposal. We may not be really strong in as you were talking about, you're more amiable, but that doesn't mean you don't have the capability for being a driver or expressive, or even changing the context would change in how you would behave in your leadership style as well. And over time as well, that changes how you engage as well. And part of the reflection piece of this is knowing where you are at the moment, and then being able to leverage off of others and working in a team, as you had mentioned, and leveraging off the analytical to bring their skills and strengths into what you may not have at that particular time. So it's all about self-awareness, but also bringing in part of your team to make sure that you can get the best result in that capacity. So I just wanted to add part of that.
I think too, since we brought up like support staff a couple times now, I can't overstate the importance of professional development and developing the people that you work with, because it's great if you understand all of this stuff, you know, but it's a whole lot more effective if everybody in your team understands this. So, you know, you may be able to adapt, you know, as an expressive to a driver or someone else, but it's even a whole lot more effective if, you know, that driver understands your perspective. You know, I work with someone that's very expressive, and first of all, I have to tell them, it's like, don't send me like a 3-paragraph email, just because it will never get read. Because I'm a driver and I need bullet points. They need to be short, sweet. But I've learned also to just like, when he comes into my office, just to be ready of like, he says, I just have a quick question. That's going to be 40 minutes of my life, he's starting to understand too. It's like, I really don't have 40 minutes to do this, And so, and it's because we took that time to do something like this. And so he's learned about me and I'm learning about him. So you need to make sure that it's not just a one-way thing.
Yeah, just real quickly, so with the support staff question, it's also ultimately effective. So for example, in nonprofits, many times the support, like the person at the front desk or the person who takes the calls, they are the first person that a client comes in touch with before they meet, a clinical social worker or somebody else. And so your services will be better. And I know the law firms are not, it could be different, but again, and we actually did a retreat in the School of Social Work, and we included staff for the first time. Our new dean included that, and they were so appreciative. But also, they said, "Well, we know we're not social workers, but we're part of this too." And so, it was validating them, but also we give better service to the students who are coming in, or if it's a nonprofit. On the other side, the woman who talked about you're expressive and kind of people you may not fit in. Well, when I was the health club salesperson, I was the only, everyone was just hard sell because that's what the manager wanted. So I had to push back and say, well, wait a minute, let's wait till the end of the month, see whose sales are higher, see whose cancellations are lower. And so sometimes you do, have to say, I know this isn't the norm, but that's the way I operate, and look at my effectiveness. Even though, because other people may not be as enlightened to understand that there are assets to maybe being a bit of an outlier in certain contexts, and if it's effective, then isn't that all that matters? But sometimes you have to be the one to kind of champion yourself in that way.
Okay, great. So now we're going to do our last exercise. How many of you have gone to meetings and at the end of the meetings you have more homework than when you went in? Right? You're like, oh no, now I have more things that I have to do. I'm going to give you 60 seconds and I want you to write this down. What one thing will you do after today's session committing you to your leadership development? Okay, what one thing will you do that you commit to for your leadership development? Okay, we're going to do this lightning round. So that means we're going to start here with the mic. You're going to say what it is you're going to do, and you're going to pass the mic on. Yeah, you thought I was going to let you keep that secret, huh? Didn't you get to know me yesterday? Okay, so again, say what it is and move it on all the way down the line, lightning round.
I'm going to take a few more of these tests to really figure out what my leadership style is.
Be mindful of others' leadership style.
Go to more leadership trainings.
Connect with my other co-chairs after this meeting and just talk a little bit about my strategy.
Do this exercise with our board.
Same, do this exercise with the people you work with.
Figure out how to take a more expressive approach to some of my volunteers.
Figure out how I can work with some of these ideas in my syllabi with my students.
I'll try to have some co-workers, especially police officers, to take this test and see how it's going to turn out.
I was going to do it with our leadership team as well.
I think for us, it would be good to do it with our coalition partners.
Electroshock therapy.
I'm going to look for more training opportunities specifically on this topic.
I'm going to continue to explore my management style, and I'm going to see if I can find some more to read about this to see if I can get some best practices.
I'm also going to pay more attention to other people's leadership styles.
I'm going to be proactive and consistent and ongoing about educating myself on these issues.
I've got a bunch of new direct reports, if you've heard recently. So I'm going to think about this for each of their styles as it pertains to them.
Put myself in situations requiring expressive skills, particularly in those to lift up those maybe who have a different style from my own.
I'm going to practice listening to my teammates so I can more easily identify their people style and be more effective.
Try to understand the leadership styles of the people I volunteer with, really think consciously about it.
Same. I'll try to recognize different leadership skills of those that I work with to adjust and adapt so I can be more efficient in my work product.
I'm going to do more of these assessments so that I can get a better read on where I am.
I'm going to look for new leadership opportunities to develop my leadership style.
Delegate more and let go of some of my perfectionism tendency.
I'd like to do more leadership training, and also I appreciate that Zanelle can tolerate my expressive style.
I'm pretty new to my job, so I want to spend some time trying to determine my coworkers' leadership style.
I'm kind of in the middle of my organization, so try to figure out, analyze the people I work with, figure out where they fit to try to best know how to lead from the middle, as we discussed.
I'm going to actively try to increase the numbers of drivers and analytic people in my groups and actively try to bring them on so that we have more of those on our boards.
I'm going to focus on making sure that within my work teams and my board teams, when we're setting goals, that they are mutual goals and we have full buy-in from everyone.
I'm going to be more mindful of the styles of others.
Right. Try to think more about how my style meshes with the styles of others and try to act in a way that gives room for their styles as well.
I want to learn more about my own leadership style and what that looks like, and then how to best utilize and strengthen those skills.
I'm going to have everyone in chambers use this tool and then take everyone for a drink so we can talk about how we can complement each other's styles.
What the judge said. Except for I'm not in chambers.
I would probably take more driving lessons because our organization is in a ditch.
I'm going to apply for that leadership position open in my division, and in my and in my application, and if I get an interview, talk about my leadership style and how it'll be helpful for all of us to have other leadership styles, as well as explain that we actually do have some analytic and amiable folks in our office, and they're some of the smartest people there, so things to do to make our office more welcoming and hearing all the voices that are there.
I think since just starting this position, learn the strengths of the people that I work with and try to be open to explore new leadership styles and adapt to them as needed.
As we try to get the Cincinnati lawyer chapter off the ground to potentially do this activity with the new board to just kind of figure out each other's leadership styles from the ground floor.
I'm going to have a conversation with a colleague about some of these issues. That wasn't supposed to be funny.
I'm going to do a little bit of what everyone else in this room has stated.
I knew before I did the exercise that I'm an extremely amiable person, and that's my main focus. So I'm going to try to be more assertive and try to dip into driver mode more often, especially with one of my support staff in my job.
I am going to figure out the leadership styles of my coworkers and perhaps suppress some of my driver tendencies.
I'm planning on doing more self-reflection in terms of my leadership style, and also trying to incorporate these type of activities when I'm working with others so I can learn how to better work with them and understand how they contribute to the team and what I can do for them.
I'm just going to try and be more conscious about these kinds of issues going forward, and similarly reflect on my coworkers and their leadership styles.
I'm going to try and develop the leadership skills that I've developed through this, the leadership skills that I've identified through this exercise that don't come as naturally to me.
I want to gain a better understanding of my current leadership type and identify what leadership type I want to be and make a plan to get there.
I'm going to be more purposeful in those that myself and my co-managers work with, in sharing our leadership styles that we all are aware of each other with those that we work with, so that they can be able to collaborate better.
At work, I'm going to consider how I can give people on my team more space to be analytic, since I'm expressive and I drive them crazy with my style. And at home, think about opportunities for my sons to develop and figure out their own little leadership styles as they're growing up.
I guess I'll just try to be more conscientious of how to work in, not that there's disharmony, but work in harmony with other folks using this sort of outside perspective of how other people operate.
I'm striving to have active awareness of the varying levels of privilege that I have in different groups and different environments, and how that affects what my leadership style is and how I show up in that room, and knowing when to step up and step back.
I'd like to better engage with those who are not as like-minded as me.
I would say just staying open and keeping myself abreast of more innovative techniques that promote overall team productivity, especially for my job. I work in state government, so we deal with productivity for the community on a daily basis.
To determine the leadership styles of my other board members.
Well, thank you so much. We have a few minutes before we get to our last words of wisdom. So is there anybody who has a question that would like to ask the panel? Now remember, they cannot give any specific legal advice, right? Don't give the advice anyway, right? Yes.
Are we on? So there's an old saying that people often don't leave jobs, they leave bosses. Are there any specific nuggets to not be that boss?
This may just be completely, subjective and idiosyncratic, but I think most people don't like to be micromanaged. And so when I talked earlier before about, taking the time to look at the mission, you could be running, a gas station, and the mission might be to provide great customer service and keep the area clean and sell as much gas as we can, or you could be running, again, a nonprofit. But I think taking the time to do that and really help all of your colleagues to know, what their part is in fulfilling that mission, then I think that can help to prevent being the kind of boss who's constantly micromanaging. And again, assuming that that's not the kind of boss we like or that you would want to be. So that's just kind of my thought, because I think, and it gets to trust, and trusting that, people generally will, do want to do a good job. It doesn't mean, again, you never might have to talk with someone about performance and things like that, but generally you're laying out the mission and the goals and where are we trying to go, and then supporting them in doing that versus kind of, managing every aspect of what their work is. That's, I don't know, again, for what that might be worth.
I think being open to create the trust amongst those that you may be leading, particularly in staff, to where they can check you on that if you become in that way that you may not want to become. So it's just, and we've had that happen sometimes where I'm fortunate to work with wonderful staff to where there was a check on where I was at the moment, and you said, you're right, we need to change things around, and we're changing those things around. Just being open to hearing from that and then course correcting afterwards.
I guess I have a little bit of a different perspective being in a college town and working for a nonprofit. You know, when we have a lot of people that's their first job. So I kind of expect them to leave. And I feel like it's my job as their employer to make sure they don't leave for a lateral job. I want to develop them. And when they do leave, I want them to be somebody that I can call on to learn from and to be a colleague with them. I very much feel like I'm a failure if somebody basically takes a job that's just down the street or just a lateral move, you know, because then it's not about the work, you know, and trying to develop themselves. So I kind of start with first, you know, hire people that will fit into the culture of the organization and protect that culture as a leader as best as I can, and to make sure that they have the tools to be able to do the job I expect of them, but always knowing that I want to develop them so they can move on. So.
One more question? We are so awesome, there are no questions. Wow. Okay, so now here's the part I put them on the spot again. What are some last words of wisdom in terms of them going out being the phenomenal leaders that they can be that you want to impart to them, because we're on our way to lunch, so make it quick.
I might just kind of tack on with what I just said. Yeah, my leadership and management style is pretty simple. I put most of my energy into hiring and making sure they fit into the culture of the organization, and then make it pretty simple. Set the expectation, give them the resources to meet the expectation, and then leave them alone. And you know, and be willing to be a student as much as you are a teacher.
I'll reiterate what I heard towards the end of the prior session. One of the judges was talking about kind of, I think one of the questions was, you know, kind of strategies to become a judge, and he just said, or, you know, trust yourself, like be yourself, don't try to change who you are because you think that's what they're looking for. It could end up where, you know, being yourself might cause you to not get a particular position, but it probably maybe wouldn't have been the best fit anyway. So I think kind of just, yes, assessing yourself and understanding your leadership style, but also just really having a lot of faith and courage in yourself that you probably, you know, do have the right intentions. And yeah, you're going to make mistakes, and your staff or colleagues or supervisors are going to check you on it, and that's just part of the learning, but continue to move forward. So.
And as a driver, one of the things that I think I need to make sure that I devote time to is to take the opportunity to listen. Not just listen to hear what is being said, but really truly listen and do one good thing to understand in leadership and developing trust is to develop the skill of active listening. Making sure that you're active listening. There's nothing else going on in your head other than listening to what the person in front of you is telling you. When you can master active listening, I think it will really evolve you as a person and as a leader that we need you to be.
Great, and I'm just going to end by recommending an article. It's called The 21 Core Beliefs That Will Take Your Leadership from Good to Great. We will have this available for you in digital format online It talks a lot about what these three have been talking about all for the past hour and a half or so, and gives you a really core set of values for you to go through, not just as a value term, but then as a value that you're actually living through the practice that you're doing. So could you help me please thank these three guys, Bob, Sleppy, Anthony Mallon, and Jerry Gonzalez. Thank you so much.